Welcome, welcome. Welcome to this edition of Ramblings of an Old Fart podcast. Hello, my name is Craig Warren. I'm 71 years old, been married almost 53 years, father of 9 and grandpa to a bunch. I'm sort of retired. I retired at 65 to provide full-time care for my wife, who's had some serious health issues. But lately I realized that I need something to do to keep my mind active, keep me sharp. So why not a podcast? I have a lot of experience. I've done a lot of different things in my 50-plus years in the workforce. And I definitely have a lot of opinions. So what more would you need? I should mention that I've never been a member of a political party, and I don't intend to do so. My podcasts don't come from a political place, just a factual and common sense place. Today, I'd like to discuss something that's been kind of a pet peeve of mine, and that's solar energy, green energy, if you will. Today it'd be more concentrated on the solar and the wind energy. Today I want to discuss a couple of issues that I've come across. And don't get me wrong, I'm not opposed to these, but I'm opposed to that we're trying to force them into being something they're not. It's just the physical limits. It's obvious that solar doesn't work at night, and wind energy doesn't work when the wind's not blowing, right? And so those are some limitations, and that's the part that I want to discuss today. Now, if you're using a standalone system, whether it's wind or solar, and you have a battery backup system, then that tends to mitigate the weaknesses, right? And I'm all for that. The problem is, as I see it, is for a power grid situation. That creates a problem. It creates fluctuations in the power grid every time it gets cloudy or when the wind stops blowing or it gets dark, right? That creates a nightmare for the people at the power company. They're trying to make sure that the grid is constant and meets the demand, and that's not easy. The other issue that I have a problem with is we have incentivized through the government these huge solar farms and wind farms and other things. The problem is many times the infrastructure down the line is not sufficient to handle that extra power, that extra load. I read an article recently about California, and they said it was estimated that approximately 40% of the solar energy produced is wasted. And I'm not sure that makes any sense, especially after the money they have spent to put this into place. And that comes to the crux of it. We have invested so much money in these huge solar farms, but not near enough money into the infrastructure, so that we can't fully realize the value of it. We basically, the government, have unincentivized this so much and put so much money into it, but we haven't done the infrastructure, and that's my point. Another part of the problem is that the power companies, because of laws and regulations passed, they have to purchase the solar and energy and wind energy that's produced. That means they have additional costs because, as I mentioned, solar and wind is not constant. I recently talked to a longtime friend of mine, David. He's worked in that field for over 40 years, power line construction and power line repair, and actually even into the generation side of it, the power generation and controlling, the power in the grid. He told me that power companies right now, because of all this wind and solar, they have to keep some of their generators into what they call a spinning mode. They're not producing power because it's not needed currently, because there's so much solar and wind coming in, so it meets all the demand of the grid. However, they have to have these spinning and ready so that within a matter of a few minutes they can bring those online to compensate for the power drop when it starts getting dark or it gets cloudy or the wind stops blowing. And so that creates a lot of extra cost for them. We're trying to make solar and wind into something they're not, and I don't know that they ever will be completely. And I think we're going to pay a price for that if we don't decide that we've got to do something a little bit different. However, on this same topic, but slightly different, I read a story recently out of Canada. If I recall, it was somewhere up near Alberta. They are having this exact issue, which they all do, but they've come up with what they figure is a fix. There's an old abandoned open pit iron mine that's filled up with water. It's pretty big. It's like over 220 meters deep. It's on flat ground pretty much, so it's just like a big round hole in the ground. It's a small lake now. But this old mine is situated not too far from some higher ground. Okay, so the plan is to build a small lake on the higher ground, and then put in a pump system and generators at the lower lake, the old mine site. And then in the daytime, when they have the extra solar power and wind power, or whatever this would happen to be, then they pump water from that lower lake, the old mine, up to the new upper lake. Then at night, when the wind, if the wind stops blowing, or at night when the solar panels aren't working, then they can open the valves and use that water, the force of the water from the higher reservoir, to turn the generators to pump electricity to meet the needs of the grid. And I have a couple questions about that. I mean, if we have to spend billions of dollars to make up for the inherent shortfalls of the technology, is it still worth it? I don't know. That's a question. That's just me. I ask those kind of questions. But that doesn't mean that we stop researching the technology. Who knows? Maybe someday someone will discover a solar-like panel that will produce electricity from, I don't know, some kind of cosmic ray from space, or, something that bombards the Earth day and night. I mean, who knows? Along with this, too, I noticed another update here as I was doing some research just as I was getting ready to record this podcast. It's out of China. It's an article out of Interesting Engineering. They are building another one of these hydroelectric projects like they are in Canada. The Chinese one will be much larger, however, but it's the same principle. They pump water from a lower elevation to a new reservoir at a higher elevation and use that to run generators at night. So it's kind of cool. I did hear one other thing. I haven't got all the details yet, but I mentioned the earlier one about somebody developing some type of a cosmic ray from space. They actually have a solar panel that they're designing, and there is a different film that they put on the top. And it will actually pick up UV radiation at night. I haven't got all the details on that. I'll try and report that as an update at some point. But, things are changing. The science is coming up with all kinds of new developments. Now, though, I want to shift to something else. One of the real problems with green energy, and especially like the solar panels, the EV batteries and stuff, is the toxicity, right? Green energy can't be truly green if it creates an environmental issue that's just as bad or worse than what we were trying to solve, right? So I've done some research on that, and I have come up with some things that I'm excited about because this kind of takes away from some of the pet peeve part of the solar and wind energy. So like I said, my research is always ongoing on this stuff, and I found information that I really like. This includes both solars and EV batteries. To their credit, governments around the world, especially in the EU, the European Union, but also in the U.S., they are creating legislation, rules, if you will, that require manufacturers to test their product before it goes out into the world. The idea is to design them with disposal and reclaiming ideas in mind. Can we refurbish it? Can we reclaim these heavy metals, these rare earth minerals, and those kind of things, so that we can make sure this doesn't turn into some toxic issue in the landfill somewhere? These are just recent. A lot of these are going to go into effect, or they are currently being debated in 2026. However, I see some of them actually went into effect in 2025. Okay. The issue I can see is if we don't do something soon, and this is what surprised me about government. Normally they don't weigh in until we already have this massive, horrible environmental issue. But right now, if they jump in right now, we should be able to stave off that kind of a situation. But if we don't, very soon, it's estimated we will have hundreds of millions of pounds annually of this waste that we won't know how to get rid of. But already we are starting to see solar panels that are designed so that they can be disassembled easier, and when they're used up, the toxic metals can be reclaimed easier, and the other stuff that is going to be available. A lot of the new solid state batteries are much safer, less fire risk, much easier to reclaim. These solid-state batteries are designed to allow for tens of thousands of charging cycles. They could possibly last the whole lifetime of the vehicle. Some of the new batteries are using much less toxic materials as well. They don't have the extended drive times, but they're still great for like urban use, like small cars in an urban setting. Still have 250, 300-mile range. But they're much easier to reclaim and dispose of, not nearly as toxic. And so I want to go through this update for 2026 on some of the things that are happening in the recycle part of it. The focus on regulatory oversight has only intensified, which is great. I am super pumped about that. In the energy sector, this is manifesting as a push for what they call a circular economy, where the government is beginning to mandate that manufacturers, not just consumers, are responsible for the toxic part of this and the toxic disposal of these products. See, that's in the past, the manufacturers haven't worried about it because they build it, they sell it, and then when it comes to this useful life, then it's the end consumer that has to worry about how to dispose of it, right? And so here's the issue. As I mentioned earlier, we're coming up. If we don't do something soon, we're going to have a waste problem, toxic materials. Maybe we could refer to it as a waste tsunami. It's coming if we don't fix it. But this is no longer theoretical. The first generation of these mass market solar panels and EV batteries are already now starting to hit their 15 and 20-year retirement age. The projections that I seen when I was doing my research is by 2030, we are expected from the solar panels that are reaching their end of life, we are expected to see somewhere around 8 million tons of projected waste. In the EV batteries by 2030, it's like 3 million tons. So that's big, but if we get on it right now, it's manageable, hopefully. But here's the thing, and this is why I say it's important that the governments are at least jump into this early. The projections from 2050 are around 200 million tons of solar panel waste and 20 plus million tons of EV battery waste. And of course this brings the like lead and cadmium, antimonium, all those kind of things, and also cobalt, lithium, nickel, all of these things that are hazardous heavy metals that can contaminate a water system really easy should they get left in a landfill somewhere. Okay, so they've put some regulatory teeth into some of this legislation, which I am glad to see. The governments are shifting the burden, the constitutional duty, if you will, onto corporations via what they call extended producer responsibility laws. I noticed in EU, and I hope it comes here too, but in EU starting in 2026, batteries come with a battery passport, if you will. What it does is it requires every battery to have a digital passport, tracking, so that if it comes to a recycle place in the future, they have a digital passport and they can check and they know exactly what is in that battery. The problem is now, if a recycling place gets a battery and it's sealed and there is no information, they don't have any idea what kind of electrolytes in there. They have no idea what kind of heavy metals. And a lot of this was designed on purpose by the manufacturers because they didn't want to let any secrets out. But that can't happen in today's world. We have to know, recycle places have to know exactly what's in it so that they can properly dispose of it or properly recycle it, reclaim the metals and whatever. Okay, the second item that I like is a mandatory recycled content. What goes along with what I was just talking about there. It has to tell you exactly. But then also along this one, it requires that 12 to 16% of the new batteries, the cobalt, lithium stuff, come from recycled sources by as early as 2030. So that's building in this recycle part of it. And then we have a universal waste designation. In the U.S., the EPA is finalizing rules right now in 2026 to officially classify solar panels as universal waste, which streamlines the recycling process, while strictly banning them from regular landfills, which is a big positive there too. And then we come to another great idea, and I'm glad to see him pushing this. And that's that the batteries are being designed for recircling. They're designed for recycling right from the start. The governments are finally moving towards the research first model. They have to look, when they build it, they have to realize, hey, at some point this has to be repaired or it has to be recycled in some way. So starting this year, new regulations, specifically the EU, their sustainable batteries regulation, they're beginning to phase in requirements that batteries be user removable, or at least by a professional. And it has to be so that it can be removed without destroying it. Standard materials. There's a push to limit the cocktail of plastics and glues used in solar panels. Researchers are now testing like debond on demand adhesives, glues that stay strong for 25 years but melt or lose their grip when hit with certain laser frequencies or chemical triggers. See, that's one of the biggest issues on the solar panels, is because they have been glued together in such a fashion it's practically impossible to dismantle. You just have to destroy them to get there. So it makes it very, very hard to reclaim the toxic metals, the heavy metals and stuff out of them. It's hard to reuse the glass. I mean, that's one of their big pushes on this, is to have it so that they can delaminate that thing and get the glass and recycle it and use it. Anyway, then we come to the producer responsibility, the cost of the waste. In the past, companies sold you the solar panel, and then the waste was your problem, which we talked about earlier. But with this EPR, the extended producer responsibility, new laws in 2025 and 26 are shifting the financial burden back to the manufacturer. If a company knows they have to pay for the recycling of every panel they sell, then they suddenly have a massive financial incentive to make their panels easier and cheaper to recycle. And that's where we come to the universal waste rule we talked about earlier on the solar panels. When you first think about that, it seems like that's foolish. We want to deregulate something, but it actually makes sense, and it's cheaper to transport them to specialized recycling centers than it is to let them sit as a hazardous waste issue in a local landfill. So if we take the regulation away, so they can't go to the landfill, but they can go in a simple, less expensive way to a recycling center. So that makes sense to me as well. And then we talked about the circular economic value earlier. The most encouraging development is that we discussed is the urban mining, the recycling. It's becoming more profitable than traditional mining. Recent figures that I got as a ton of old EV batteries can contain up to 300 times more lithium than a ton of the raw material. So that get the raw material, then you actually have to process it to separate out. So we have companies like the Redwood Materials and Lee-Cycle or Ly-Cycle, however you say that. They're building factories that and recycling plant that are located right next to the battery manufacturers. So the waste from one becomes the ore for the other. I like that idea. I've seen that here locally in steel. In the steel industry, we have one place that takes in old metals, old cars, grinds it up, and then turns it into a product that can go over to the steel mill across the street. On rail cars, just go across the street, and then they can make new steel beams, whatever. So I like that idea here for the EVs. It makes sense to me. Okay, so in 2026 is seeing some pushback because of this. We've had this throwaway culture for quite a while. However, in the world of service management, we know that if one cell, basically, let me rephrase this too, because basically what we're doing is we're kind of trying to get rid of the disposable batteries. But in the world of service, we know that a lot of times like in a lead acid battery, if that one cell goes bad, the whole battery's toast, right? But in EV batteries, manufacturers have treated them the same way. However, the reality is there's companies like Autocraft that have released data showing that 92% of failed EV battery packs, the vast majority of the modules are still perfectly healthy. So now we come to local rebuilders or even repair shops. Instead of charging the customer $15,000 for a new battery, the shops can use advanced diagnostic tools. And now, because the requirements are made so the batteries can be dismantled without destroying them, we can swap out or rebuild, take care of those new, those failed modules, and bring the battery back up to a 95% health for a fraction of the cost. So here's where we get into the right to repair laws. This has been coming for quite a while. I'm glad to see it's making its way here. In 2026, the regulations are designed to break basically the monopoly that you have to take your car back to the dealer. Nobody else can touch it. In the EU, the right to repair directive is in 2026. As of July 2026, manufacturers are legally barred from using software locks to prevent independent shops from installing parts. They must also make spare parts and repair manuals available to everyone, not just authorized dealers. And then we get to the standard diagnostics. And this is something that I know a little bit about. I've worked a fair amount of time in the automotive parts and service and that kind of stuff. The OBD2 port, or the OBD port, is a standard throughout the industry here in the U.S. that we've referred to as the OBD2. And so all of your test equipment has the same connector to plug into that. They use the same basic code structure so that one diagnostic tool can do most every major manufacturer. And this is what they're working on here as well, so that the independent repair shops can go in and do some repair and stuff on this. And of course, then the calibrations and all the other stuff has to be accessible to the mechanics as well. And that's where the next part of this comes into. The solar industry is kind of moving backward in a way, so that they're designing these repairable solar panels. And here's some of the new technologies that's come up that's make this lots easier and a lot less waste. One of it, I see a lot of the new cells have what they call a perovskite cell. They're lead-free. We talked earlier about the hazardous waste. This new solar cell is being commercialized this year, is moving forward. It's tin-based or bismuth-based. I'm not exactly sure what that means, but it sounds good to me if it's less toxic. But anyway, these eliminate the toxic lead that's in a lot of them, making the panels much safer to handle at the end of their life. However, the other advancement is they're using microinverters. Instead of one giant expensive string inverter that kills the whole system, it fails. Most 2026 setups are using these modular microinverters on each panel. If one of them breaks, a local technician can come and swap it out in 15 minutes without shutting down the entire system. So anyway, now we move on to what we talked a little bit about earlier, the design for disassembly trend. Because of the extended producer responsibility laws, the manufacturers starting to build cars, panels, and solar panel, all kinds of stuff, more easier repaired or recycled. So like in 2026 EV batteries, they're moving away from being glued in the suckers so you can't get them apart without destroying them, to going back to mechanical fasteners like screws or bolts. And then the serviceable EV, we're seeing the rise of the glider platforms, where the motor and batteries are designed to be dropped out and simply replaced or upgraded, while the rest of the car and the chassis stays in contact and stays on the road for 20 years or more. Okay, so we're entering a whole new era of this specialized rebuilding. The industry is moving away from just swapping whole battery packs towards a model where independent shops can diagnose and repair them as a module. And by 2026, the barrier between dealer-only repairs and the independent service is being broken by two things: the advanced diagnostic platforms and the standardized certifications. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but the ASC certification's been around for a long, long time in the mechanic end of things. Most any of your good quality mechanic shops will have ASC certified technicians. And so this is coming into play here with the hybrid electric vehicle market. So they're making the diagnostic test equipment available, and of course then the manufacturers are being required to release the specifications so they know how to test and what to test for. And then the parts are going to be available so that local technicians can take care of it and save the customers a lot of money and create a lot less waste into our landfills. And of course, then we come back to the right to repair, and that's an important part of this. And this hasn't just happened because of the solar. This has happened in all of the automotive stuff because manufacturers were trying to lock their independent repair shop out on a lot of these newer vehicles. But now the manufacturers can no longer use the software to lock people out. They have to give you the passwords to get in and be able to do some diagnostic work. And then, of course, they have to make that available to these shops and make sure they have access to it. Most all this stuff is on a cloud system of some kind where they can tap into it. And this allows even for remote diagnostics that the dealer used to not have access to. And then we come to the specialized rebuilder. It's actually become the local independent shop. Again, here with somebody who wants to invest $5,000-$10,000 or so in the scanner and the other tools necessary now, they can take care of these battery problems, replace some of the little cells inside of it, the little modules inside. They could easily save the customer $10,000 rather than sell them a $15,000, $20,000 battery. So that leaves a little room for them to make some money as well. So let's take a quick glance at what we have here. The main problem we have here, we have lithium-ion batteries. They have lithium, cobalt, nickel. They have a fairly high fire risk because of liquid electrolytes. And then they're complex and they're expensive to recycle. They're good for long-range EVs and all that stuff. Then you have the sodium-ion batteries that are coming out now. They're way less toxic. They're lower fire risk. They're simple. And then they're good for like grid storage. Somebody has their own solar system. They're good for grid storage. And then they have small EVs that They don't have the length, the runtime, like the more expensive batteries, but they're a lot less expensive and a lot lighter. These for in the small urban setting would be perfect. And then, of course, now we move into the lithium metal and ceramic. They're solid. There's no liquids, no zero fire danger. They're moderately easy to process and to recycle. But these are very high end. They're braided for 10,000 recharge cycles. So chances are they'll last the whole lifetime of the vehicle. One final update. I've seen an article in Interesting Engineering where now they have, in solar panels, they have a perovskite. It's a different type of a hybrid material they use, which is a lot less toxic. But the other thing is they have some kind of a coating on these, and they've tested these in Spain. But it can produce power simultaneously in the sunshine, or even if it's raining. When the raindrops, when they hit on that surface, create electric charge. So even if the sun isn't shining as much, they can still produce some power from the rain, which I found quite interesting. One other article I seen, it's not exactly on this, but it could turn into something like this. I read an article in Science Daily where scientists just figured out how to use light, specific frequencies of light, as a remote control to control crystals and how that they operate and change. I found that quite interesting. Anyway, one last thought here. Researchers at King's College in London have identified an unusual new form of aluminum, one of the most abundant metals we have on Earth. The discovery points to a much less expensive and more sustainable, more easily recycled substitute for the rare earth metals that are widely used in modern technology. That's in Science Tech Daily, SciTech Daily. Okay, a lot of things are happening to make green energy safer and green. But let's remember one thing. After all, green energy cannot truly be green if it creates another environmental crisis in its place. That's it for today. I thank you for listening to my ramblings, but that's what I do these days. Join me next time, won't you? I'm Craig Warren, and this has been the Ramblings of an Old Fart podcast. God bless you and keep you till next time.